Our first tactic is called a pin. In a pin, when we attack a piece, there happens to be a piece behind it. The piece in front is worth less than the piece behind it, so the piece in the front would rather not move and get taken, rather than have the piece behind it get taken. Let's take a look to see how this would work. In this position, we have white to move, and we can see that there's a lot of pieces on the same line. For example, the queen and the king are on the same f-file, the king and the bishop are on the 8th rank, and of course the queen and the pawn are on the 7th rank as well. However, only one of the pins here works. We can try rook to h8. This pins the bishop to the king, and obviously the bishop can't move, otherwise the king's in check. However, the bishop doesn't need to move. The rook isn't threatening to take the bishop, because the rook's worth 5, the bishop's worth 3, and if the rook takes the bishop, obviously white actually loses material. Similarly, rook a7 is not a good idea either, because if white plays rook a7, he isn't threatening to take the pawn. Of course the pawn can't move because the queen would be lost, but the pawn doesn't need to move. The rook's worth 5, the pawn's worth 1, and white is definitely not going to take that pawn next move. Therefore, white's best move here is to play the move rook to f1. With rook to f1, we're attacking the queen. The queen can't move because the king behind it is more valuable, so the queen is forced to end up getting traded for the rook. White is up a rook in this position, and he will be winning. Moving on to the next example, here we can see that white also has another opportunity for a pin. If you want some time to figure it out for yourself, you can pause the video. In this position, white can play the move bishop to c4. We see that the queen and the king are on the same diagonal, which makes this a perfect situation for a pin. Of course, the queen can't move because otherwise the king would be in check. That's not illegal. So the queen has to stay there and be taken by the bishop. The bishop's worth 3, the queen's worth 10, so obviously white's getting a great amount of material for this. Now for this example, we can see that not all pins involve a queen and a king. In this case, the king actually has nothing to do with the pin. Once again, if you want some time for this puzzle, you can pause your video right now. The correct answer here is to play the move bishop to g2. Now, we see that the knight and the rook this time are on the same diagonal. If the knight moves, for example, knight a5, then we can just take the rook. Obviously, since the knight's worth less than the rook, the knight cannot move and will have to be taken by the bishop. There's no way to protect the knight either. Notice that this pin happens because there is a hanging piece. Both the knight and the rook are hanging, which means that they don't have any protection. This means that the knight is ready to be taken, and as long as nothing can defend it, then it's a prime suspect for a pin. In our final example, we see that we already have a pin. In fact, the queen here is already pinned to the king, like this. However, just taking it doesn't really do anything. If we take it, knight takes, rook d8 is not checkmate because the knight can take back. And if we try to do something like bishop takes the knight first, or any other move, then he can just take our queen immediately. So what we actually need to do is to not take advantage of this queen, not through the pin, but maybe through a deflection. So what we need to do is get his king onto d8, and after the king's on d8, then this knight becomes pinned by this bishop. In that case, the knight would no longer be guarding the queen, and we can swoop in and take the queen. So how do we get the king onto d8? Well, we can first go rook to d8 check. Black's only move here is to play king takes d8. The king has nowhere else to go. And after the king takes d8, it's on d8 for us, so we can take the queen with queen takes c6. As you can see, our first pin here, this pin doesn't do anything. But after playing rook to d8 check, and after king takes d8, we now have a better pin, this pin here, which is more useful. Pin pieces can't move, especially if the pin is against a king. So then we can play queen takes c6. No matter what, this knight can't move, otherwise this king will be in check, so we can win a whole queen. Pins are a very useful tactic for all beginners and people who are even more advanced. They happen pretty frequently, so they're definitely a good pattern to know.